elementary school, and we're pulling off on an exit going to Florida, and my dad does the classic dad thing, and he pulls into a McDonald's drive-through. Yes, amen. And I don't remember what I got to eat for lunch that day, but I do remember that both my brother, Matt, and I got ice cream cones, because obviously we're on a road trip. And I don't know if this was real or not, you guys, or if it was just perceived in my mind, but my brother's ice cream cone, I promise you, was bigger than mine. And we got and we got the same size, regular cone, but his looked bigger. And so I did what any annoying little sister would do, and I took it out of his hand and gave him mine, because I was like, I get the bigger one, obviously. And he did what any older brother with a very annoying sister would do, and he hit me in the stomach to get it back. Yep. And then my parents did what any parents would do in the midst of violence, and I got both ice cream cones. Because, he hit me, and I think that's perfectly fair, right? But in all seriousness, fairness has been instilled in me from such a young age. I have wanted things to be fair for so long, and the problem is that really isn't the way of Jesus. Now, I know some of you are like, I'm sorry, what did that chick just say? Yeah, fairness actually isn't the way of Jesus. When I say that, I mean that so many of us have created a value system around everything being perfectly fair, but according to God, He's not fair. Maybe some of us lean on our own efforts, believing in karma, that if we put good out into the world, we'll get good back, or that if someone puts bad out into the world, they've got bad coming back to them like a boomerang. Or if someone does something really horrible, we take it upon ourselves to make sure that that person gets canceled and never sees the light of day, that they get justice, that they get what they deserve. All you got to do is spend an afternoon at a Little League game or an afternoon on social media, and you will know that fairness is the way of the land. But there's something about Jesus that sets him apart from every other way. See, Jesus was on a completely different playing field than any other religious or spiritual leader. And it's why he kept getting into trouble over and over again with people, because he comes onto the scene and he shakes things up. Because in his kingdom, it was no longer about an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and he displays this so perfectly in the parable we're looking at tonight. And so if you have your Bible, I would love to invite you to turn to Luke chapter 15, and I want to review verses 1 through 2 as we get going. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming to hear him, but the Pharisees and the experts in the law were complaining, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." I think it's really important just to note here that the word before the quotation is they were what? They were complaining. It's not like, oh, they just said, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them, yay!" No, they were complaining, and you can almost hear it through the page. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. You can almost hear through the paper, can you believe Jesus is associating with them? See, in Jesus' community, all outsiders are welcome. The ones are on the margins are the ones that he healed. The shamed people in the town were the ones he went toward. This was Jesus' kingdom crew, and Israel's leaders are watching and criticizing, and so he started throwing these dinner parties as a symbol of how God's kingdom was here for the sick, the poor, and the people who could never pay him back. And it'd be so easy for us to stand in this moment and watch this and be like, I don't understand, and be judgmental toward the Pharisees, but imagine this. Imagine the person you can't stand the most, whether they are in this room or on a screen or you actually know them in real life or not. Imagine the person that just makes your skin crawl. You cannot stand them so much. Jesus would eat with them. Now, if that is a problem for you, we're going to pray for your heart tonight. Jesus would eat with them. Imagine the person that did something so bad they've been canceled and they cannot see the light of day ever again. Jesus would eat with them. Maybe it's you, and you've done something you regret and you feel cast aside and like you cannot get a second chance. Jesus would eat with you. See, according to Jesus, sinners were the people he always wanted to be around. And as he starts telling these stories, the first two you heard this morning, he's talking to two crowds: the tax collector sinner crowd and the experts in the law Pharisee crowd. And we might know this story popularly as the prodigal son, but I've come to know it as a compassionate father because it really is a story about the way a dad loves two boys, loves two sons, and how both of them are lost in different ways. And I think the ways that he responds to them are so surprising. In verses 11 through 32, Jesus begins to tell this story, to broadcast this story of two different kinds of sons. And of course, the thing behind the thing is that the story about the two different kinds of son is also talking about the people sitting in front of him, which would have been the tax collector sinner crowd and the Pharisee experts in the law crowd, the younger brother and the older brother. So in verse 11, let's see where he starts. Then Jesus said, "A man had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the estate that will belong to me.' So he divided his assets between them." See, this would have been the equivalent of a son going up to his dad and saying, "Dad, I wish you were dead." Some of you are like, dang. Yeah. Would that go well for any of you? No. The answer should be no, an emphatic no. We don't do that, right? Because that wouldn't have been customary for that day to get an inheritance before a parent had passed on. That's like not even the point. The dad would have had to sell off a third of his property to even fulfill this request, and he did. And in this society, people's land was everything to them. It symbolized their status, their wealth, where they stood in the community, and the younger son is basically asking him to tear his life apart, and he does that, which leaves him with only 2/3 of the estate. Let's see what happens next in verse 13. After a few days, the younger son gathered together all he had and left on a journey to a distant country, and there he squandered his wealth with a wild lifestyle. The word squandered would have been a very graphic word, meaning to scatter or to waste. I don't know if you've ever completely wasted something. One of my first memories of feeling like I completely wasted something was I spent all summer saving up so many quarters for this thing called a Tamagotchi. Any of you? I know, it made a comeback. It really kind of weirded me out. I'm not going to lie. I cannot believe that thing came back. But I loved that Tamagotchi. It was a pink keychain. I had it on my book bag. I fed that little Tamagotchi digital animal. For those of you who don't know, you do not need to know. But, and I just loved that Tamagotchi. It had a name. I had issues. It's fine. And one day I went to my friend Sarah's house, and she had a pool. Some of you know where this is going. And she, because she was, not the best of friends, picked up that Tamagotchi and threw it in the pool. I know. Sarah and I didn't make it as friends, but, or maybe for you, you've never had someone throw a Tamagotchi in a pool, but maybe it's like the first day of a trip and your parents or your caregiver give you money, like maybe even this one right now because you're not going with them, and the first day you think to yourself, "I'm rich," and you spend all of it. And then like here in this moment, you're like, "I don't have any money left for the rest of the week." It's like that, but for your entire life. He wasted everything. Let's continue in verse 14. Then after he spent everything, a severe famine took place in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and looked for one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to the fields to feed pigs. He was longing to eat the carob pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Something to note, for a Jewish man, being sent to feed pigs would have been the ultimate insult because pigs were not kosher. They would have been considered unclean. And carob pods, that's not like, "Oh, you know what I really would like to eat tonight? Carob pods." No one was saying that. They were something that really were only for fattening up a pig, or for people who were poor to get just like basic sustenance to live another day. When you have your face in a feeding trough eating carob pods, something has gone wrong. So imagine this. He's broke. He's starving. He's far away from home where nobody knows him. The story continues in verse 17. But when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired workers have food enough to spare, but here I am dying from hunger? I will get up and go to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired workers.' So he got up, went to his father. But while he was still a long way from home, his father saw him. His heart went out to him. He ran and hugged his son and kissed him. And then his son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Hurry, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate, because this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And so they began to celebrate." See, it'd be so easy to gloss over and be like, "Oh, isn't that a nice little story?" But we can't do that, because there's so many details in here that say so much. We might think the father would say here, like, "Oh, there he comes. I knew it. Big loser. Here he comes, coming on back home." Or we might think he's like, "Yeah, I knew he'd come eventually. I can't believe this kid." But that's not what he does. He runs toward him. Ancient Middle Eastern patriarchs did not run. Children ran, youth ran, women might have run, but dignified patriarch men did not run. It would have required them to look silly, to look messy, to pick up their clothes and bare their legs and run in ridiculous-looking ways. And at the sight of his son, he's willing to do that because he missed him so much. The other thing that stands out to me here is that the word for hugged would mean like that he fell on his neck. Like he missed him so much, it was a kind of hug where he just fell on him because he loved him so much and couldn't believe he was home. It took a really long time for me when I first started dating my husband, Kyle, to get used to his family's style of hugging. And what I mean by that is that I grew up in a family where we didn't really have a style. Of our style was that we didn't hug. And I was loved like crazy by my family, like hear me say, but hugging was just not our vibe. We were like, imagine the Queen of England with her dogs standing next to her and just like snobby for unclear reasons. That was my family's vibe. Like not royalty, okay, very middle class, no reason to be like this. But that was just our vibe, very snobby, cold folk. And so when I started dating Kyle, I'm just like, the hugging constantly with his family was really startling. And so one day we go to a family wedding, and it's the first time I'm meeting his extended family. And I kid you not, you guys, I was hugged more in this 5-hour period than I had been hugged in like a decade. And some of you might be like, "Oh, that's so sweet." No, it was startling. It was too much for me. It's like, could somebody please stop? But that was just the way they loved. They had big, like, crack a rib type of hugs. You know what I'm saying? Some of you are in families like that. Even dressed up in an all, like, black tie affair, they were going to hug you so tight, you really wondered, like, am I going to breathe again? Like, his aunt came up to me, and she like started crying when she saw me, like, "Please don't leave, Kyle. I'm so glad you're with him." And I'm like, is there something I should know? They just are so loving, and that's the kind of hug I imagine right here in this moment, this full embrace, messy, ridiculous, don't care how they look, crack a rib type of hug. And not only that, but he also brings out the fattened calf, which was only reserved for huge religious celebrations, not an intimate family gathering, and he puts a ring on his finger, a robe on his shoulders, and sandals on his feet. And the ring was huge because it would have been a signet ring, which would have had a family seal on it and was a way of like signing a contract, like, you are mine. You are in our family. The son is saying, I don't deserve to be here. I do not deserve to be your son. And by putting that ring on his son's finger, he is saying, I'm not going to let you do that because you're a son to me. Did you know that some other world religions have taken this story and rewritten it with their message? It's such a popular story that it's been rewritten a couple of times. And in Buddhist tradition, in Buddhist literature, it was rewritten with a different message. And I want to just kind of zoom out and summarize it a little bit because I do think it says so much of the contrast of who Jesus is. See, in the Buddhist version of the lost son, one day a son leaves home with no plan for a return. And when he leaves kind of like a middle-class family. And he goes from town to town, begging for food, looking for anything he can get. And the older he gets, the needier he becomes. And one day, he stumbles back around to his home, but this time now it's a palace. And over time, his family has grown wealthy. And the son is out on the street, and from way up high in the window, he can see his dad is sitting up there. And he's looking at him. And he's so scared, he runs really far away. And then he realizes, I've got nothing. And so a few days later, he comes back, and he's homeless, and he's desperate. And he comes back disguised as someone else. He's so afraid. And his father knew it was him, but he never addressed him as his son, pretended not to know him. This would be like if you wasted everything your parents gave to you, did terrible in college when you left, or got fired from your job, and just had nothing, and you came back begging to just sleep in the basement or on a couch, and they pretended not even to know you, but then we're like, there's the sidewalk, and you can mow the lawn the rest of your life to get back in the house. That's basically what happened. His dad said, you can be a hired worker here and earn your keep. And so he did that. So he earned his keep. The father pretended not to know him. He had to prove himself. And so one day the father goes out and finds him. He gets down on his level and he says, get on with your work and don't be lazy. It's not really warm and fuzzy, huh? The son then spends 20 years working as a servant for his dad, and all this time the dad is pretending he does not know who his son is. And just before the father dies, he admits to his son he knew it was him the whole time, but needed to see him prove himself to earn his way back. Why do I tell you this? I tell you this because I don't think very many of us actually know the God of the Bible. I think actually a lot of us see God this way. And that we might have been sold a rewrite we don't even know, where we see God as distant and cold and way up far in the sky, and that if there is even a God at all, he is asleep and does not seem to care. Maybe for you, you have come by this view of God for very honest reasons. Maybe you've had an authority figure in your life that has been cold or distant, and so the idea of a compassionate father feels like a joke to you. Or maybe you grew up in a religious environment that told you this is what God is like. And so to see God as merciful or compassionate feels like, surely this can't be the Christian God I've heard about everywhere else. See, I think some of us might even prefer the rewrite, either because we can't understand the real compassion of God in light of what we've done, or because we think that we have to earn our way back to God and that therefore everyone else should too. Let's go back to the Jesus version of the story to see the older brother's reaction. Now, his older brother was in the field, and he came and approached the house. He heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked what was happening. The servant replied, "Your brother has returned, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he got his son back safe and sound." But the older son became angry and refused to go in, and his father came out and appealed to him, but he answered his father, "Look, these many years I have worked like a slave for you, and I never disobeyed your commands, yet you never gave me even a goat so that I could celebrate my friends. But when this son of yours," do you notice he doesn't say my brother? "When this son of yours came back, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him." See, it'd be so easy to let this passage be a story about the first son, but that's only Act 1. The original listeners of this parable would not have been listening to this and like wiping tears down their face, like, "Oh, this is so beautiful." They would have been so annoyed and quite frankly offended. Like, you're saying he's allowed back in? Jesus' purpose wasn't just to point out God's grace to sinners, but to draw attention to the older brother hearts in the room of that this is what he is like. Did you notice how the older brother talks about his brother and how he addresses his dad? He doesn't say, "Father, look," he just says, "Look." And he won't even acknowledge being in the same family as him. He's furious, and he's particularly upset because the thing that they're eating is a delicacy, and it would have been expensive, and it would have come from his future inheritance. He's mad too, and he's greedy too, but showing it in a very different way. So let's see what the dad says to him. Then the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and everything that belongs to me is yours. It was appropriate to celebrate and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." And he repeats what he said when starting the party for the younger son, except instead of saying, "Did you notice?" he doesn't say, "This son of mine." The first time he talked about this, that's what he called him. But now he says, "Your brother." Did you notice that? Why would he say that? Because he's trying to communicate to him, this man, he belongs to us too. He is yours too. And the older brother is mad because this isn't fair. I think some of you know the older brother well because, quite frankly, you don't relate to the younger brother in this story. Like maybe for you, you hear this and there's a little bit of you that's like, is this even responsible? Like, what is this kid gonna learn from any of this? You would never dare ask your parents for something like this, let alone waste all of it, right? Notice his dad reminds him, he's not just his son, he's your brother. And that's why I think the rewrite appeals to some of us, because we want to keep earning God's forgiveness, and we want everyone else to as well. Because maybe deep down, we're so mean to ourselves, we can't even fathom being that kind to someone else. See, I think the danger is that we can be in church our entire lives and miss the actual point. That of no merit of our own, God loved us and sent his son to die for us, and nothing we do can make God love us more, and nothing we do can make him love us any less. And when we act out the way of the older brother, we don't look anything like Jesus. Brian Stevenson, who's a lawyer for people on death row and the author of Just Mercy, said it this way: each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. We all need mercy. We all need justice, and perhaps we all need some measure of unmerited grace. See, I think this is why it's hard for those of us who are the younger brother to accept, because we feel like, I do not deserve that kind of love. Receiving a love like that does not feel fair. And in Jesus' story of the compassionate father, he said something no belief system had ever said: that you don't have to do anything to inherit the love and grace of God, because Jesus did it for you. See, remember what the father said about the younger son. He said he was lost and now he's found. He was dead and now he's alive. He didn't say, your brother messed up. Your brother didn't cut it. Your brother didn't earn this. No, he just doesn't care. He says he was dead and now he's alive, and he ran to him looking foolish, looking messy, threw his arms around his son to embrace him. Jesus isn't fair. Thank God. The older brother's heart posture is what I think is so dangerous, because so many of us walk around with this heart and we do not know it because it's been so easy to hide. It is so easy to walk around with an older brother heart and convince ourselves that it's good because we're trying to be good on our own. And we're walking around, and deep down, this judgmental, mean way of living is eating away at us, but it also feels good to be a little superior. See, this is why Jesus put the older brother in the story. Tim Keller says it this way: there are two ways to be lost. You can escape God through trying to be good on your own, or by running far away from him. And there are a lot of us walking around with younger and older brother hearts, and we look very different, but we are very the same. And if in your heart of hearts you think, I try really hard, I'm being obedient, therefore God owes me a good life, Jesus might be someone you look to advice for, but he is not your Savior. Because the gospel message is one that says, I cannot do this on my own. The Apostle Paul writes it this way in Romans chapter 5, verse 6. When we were utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for us sinners. See, I think the non-Jesus version of this story is how a lot of us operate, because we don't believe we're worthy, or we're trying so hard to earn God's love, we don't see what's right in front of us. And so I just want to ask you tonight, deep down, what do you actually believe? Like, not what do your parents believe, not what do your grandparents believe or your teachers believe. What do you believe about God the Father and what his love looks like? Do you believe we're too sinful or broken to receive his mercy? Or that because of the good we do, we deserve a good life, we deserve heaven? Because how you answer that question will determine the way that you live out your walk with Jesus the rest of your life. It really will. And what I'm so worried about for some of you is that you have been sold a rewrite of the God of the Bible and you don't even know it. And you've seen God as cold and distant and angry, but that's not who God is. Jesus tells the story of a father who comes close. Skye Jethani describes it this way: there are 4 ways to be toward God. And it's not a life over God, and it's not a life under God, and it's not a life for God. Through Jesus and the Holy Spirit, we are offered a life with God, with him. And the thing about being the older and younger brother is that they're both exhausting, and I know because I've lived both. See, when I was in high school, right before I went into high school, I became a Christian. And a few years before that, my parents had gotten divorced. And so there was this little part of me, when I followed Jesus, that I didn't admit it out loud, but there was this part of me deep down that was like, okay, Jesus, if I do good and if I do the right things, like, will you put my parents back together, please? And I think even though I didn't say it, I really was like, God, like, I'll do the right things. I'll impress the right people. I will be kind. I will, like, sit next to the kid who has no friends. Like, I'll do it all. And I kept thinking, like, if I keep doing these good things, then Jesus will repay me, and he'll put my parents back together, and we'll be this happy family, and it'll be great. And then that didn't happen. And so my view of God was so confused because it didn't feel fair. And I thought God was fair. And so I ran so far from God, both from the relationships that I entered into to the ways that I treated my body. And I was so mad at God because he felt distant and cold. Like, where was he? Where was he? But then God, being so rich in mercy through the love of a small group leader that would not quit on me, showed me who God really was and reminded me that while he gave up his life for me because he raised Christ from the dead, he was also a Christ. He was also a God that could raise up all of my circumstances too, and that it might not look how I want it to look, but that he's the kind of God that can redeem and restore so many broken things. And that he's also the kind of God that promised to be with me. And I learned through the next year by walking alongside this small group leader who discipled me like crazy and loved me even though I was so annoying, you guys. Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm still annoying, but I was really bad then. And she just would not quit with me. Because what she taught me about God was that he didn't leave. He was with me in the midst of it, and I came to know Jesus for who he really was, that he didn't promise to wave a magic wand over my entire life to make everything and every hard thing go away, but he did promise to be with me in every single step. And he did promise to redeem and restore every broken thing. And even if it didn't look how I wanted it to look, I don't even have time to tell you the story, but you would not believe the redemption in my family's life and the redemption in my relationship with my parents and my mom and my dad. See, what I didn't know about God then that I know now is that there is nothing I could have done to make God love me more, and nothing that I did made him love me any less. He just loved me, and he just loves you. And so what I want to ask you tonight is this. In this story, who are you? Like, who are you in this story? Because see, I think some of you tonight are sitting in the seat of the younger brother. And for whatever reason, maybe to no fault of your own, you have run far from God and you can't even imagine how to get back to him. Maybe you've been numbing yourself with everything and anything to get your mind off the pain of your life. And I want to tell you, I get it. I really do get that. But I also want to tell you that the grace and mercy of God is for you too. That it's not for everyone but you. See, did you notice the younger brother doesn't come home once he realizes his dad will take him back? The younger brother comes home because he's starving. Jesus doesn't need you to clean up your life to come to him. He just wants you home. He just wants you home. But some of you are in a different seat tonight. You're in the seat of the older brother. And maybe you've been in the back row for a while now, metaphorically or literally, arms crossed, ears closed, because you've heard this, you've been there, you've done that. But deep down, there is an angst within because you've been trying to earn your way to goodness, and it's an uphill climb you cannot achieve on your own. And you cannot fathom forgiveness and grace for other people because you are so mean to yourself. And Jesus tells you too, I want you home. See, he can't change who we pretend to be. He just asks us to come home as we are and to let him transform us. God is not startled by you. God isn't confused about your life or like, oh no, like what do we do here? He is the God of the universe. He knows every hair on your head. He knows every story from the last 2 years. He knows every lonely place. And he just wants you home. See, remember what I told you about the way the father responded to the younger son, that he put sandals on his feet and a robe on his shoulder and a ring on his hand. That ring was his way of saying, the truest thing about you is that you're my son. None of that is really who you are. And you're home. And what I want to tell you is that when you stand in that identity, when the truest thing about you is the love God has for you, you are so free. It is the freest and richest life, and it looks upside down to the world, but it is so free. Because when you mess up, and you probably will, you will know you don't have to go run into a cave of shame, but that you can come back to the loving Father who would hug you like he fell on his neck because he missed you so much. And when you do mess up again, you can run back to the Father knowing he just wants you home. When someone says something about you that's untrue, you can know the truest thing about you is God's love for you. When someone convinces you or tries to tell you that you are unworthy or unloved, you can remember you were worth everything to him. And you are worth everything to Jesus. And his death on the cross and resurrection proves that. And when you want to run away, and you probably will, you can remember that our God is the kind of God who told a story about a father who ran toward his son and fell on his neck because that's how much he missed him. To help us understand his love for us. That is our God. He is our home. He is our safe and secure place to land. There are two ways to be lost, and he just wants us home. Jesus, thank you for a story that reminds us of your love for us. God, thank you for the reminder that we can be lost in very non-obvious ways. God, I pray tonight over this room that those of us who have run far away from you, either through just complete rebellion and totally running away, or through tons of pride and thinking we're good on our own, God, that you would humble us and remind us that your love for us is so big and so wide we can't even fathom it, and you just want us home. We love you, Jesus. Amen.